The first step, every penetration tester with exclusive authorization and permission, and after having signed the rules of engagement, is supposed to do on a network is to check the number of devices that are found on that network. If you look at my Kali Linux operating system here or my VMware, you're going to discover that I have a bunch of devices here. Let's take for example that you are in an organization as a penetration tester and you have been given an exclusive right to scan devices on this network. What are you going to do? The first thing you need to do is to discover which device is which on this network before you can proceed with your penetration testing, or before you can proceed into checking which device is vulnerable and which one is not vulnerable. How do you discover devices on a network? For you to device or discover devices on a network, the first thing you are going to do is you need a tool. In our tutorial, we are going to use a tool known as Netdiscover. Okay, Netdiscover. But before using this tool, how do we get this tool? For you to get this tool, the first thing you need to do is you are going to come to your Kali Linux, for example. You come here to all programs and you are going to type Netdiscover, and you can now see that it is here. If I click on it, you will see that we have a new interface here, or a command line interface here, whereby we can now see how we can use this tool. This tool comes pre-installed in Kali Linux. What if in the case whereby you are using an Ubuntu operating system, because Ubuntu does not have Netdiscover? What you are going to need to do at this point in time is that you are going to need to come to your Mozilla Firefox. You come, or you go to your favorite right browser and you type Netdiscover, and then you give it GitHub, okay, and you hit enter. So now you now see the first link here which says Netdiscover App Scanner. If you click on it, it is going to take us to the GitHub repository, and then we can now get a link from there which we are going to clone in our Ubuntu operating system. So you are going to come to this code here, and then you are going to click here and you go back to maybe your Ubuntu in this case, which is here, but I am not going to do that. Or you come back to Kali. Let me minimize this, and then you can now do git clone, and then you paste that link here, and then you hit enter. It is now going to load, and you are now going to get, you are going to clone Netdiscover on your operating system. I already have this pre-installed, so there's no need for me to be doing this. So I am going to backspace this, and then we are going to continue with what you can do with Netdiscover. The first thing for you to use Netdiscover is to know the network which you are found in. And for you to know the network which you are found in, let's say that this is your operating system and you want to discover these other devices on this network. You are going to come here. First of all, check the network that you are connected to. And how do you do it? You will need to check the IP address of this Kali Linux operating system by doing an if config. Okay, when you do an if config, you hit enter, and you can now see that we are running on ETH0. What this means is that we are connected to the internet using an Ethernet cable, like those we used to have in the cyber cafes in those days. So you are now going to see your init address, which is your IPv4 address, and you can see that our IP address here is 192.168.40.128. So this IP address, the network or the subnet part of this IP address is this first one here, meaning that every device on this network, is it Ubuntu, Windows 10 or Metasploit, have these numbers here. This is the network part of this network. So I am going to copy this, and then I will come here, and what I will need to do now is to teach you how you can use Netdiscover. So you are going to do Netdiscover, or you can do sudo. I'll clear my screen. To make my work neat. You do sudo Netdiscover -i, and you give it the interface. I will first of all give it the interface here, and look at what is going to happen. What I am simply telling Netdiscover here is that it should show me the various devices that are running on this network, and we expect it to load and bring us a bunch of information with IP addresses like IPv4, which you can see here, IPv4 with 136, 140, and you can see their MAC addresses, and you can see the MAC vendor here. So these are the devices that are currently running on this operating system or on this network. I am going to do a Control C to abort. I clear my screen. I'll do Netdiscover -help again, and then this is the command which we just used. When you are using a -I, it means that you want to connect, you want to discover the devices that are in that network. That was what we just did now. Now, what if you want to check the network range or use the network range to discover most of these devices? You are going to use a -R. How do you do this? You come here, you do sudo netdiscover, you give it the interface. What is this interface? It is that Ethernet cable. It is telling us how we are connected to the internet, and we are using an Ethernet connection. That is why we are giving it an ETH0. And then now, since we want to check the network range, we want to check all these devices on this network at the same time, you are going to do a -R, because R is given for the network range to scan all given devices on that network. And then we are going to give it the subnet part of our IP address, which is 192.168.40.0. Okay, and you give it a /24, telling it that it should scan all the devices on this network using this CEDAR notation. Now, don't get confused here. Where did I take this first IP address? Now, let me go back to another terminal. If I come to this terminal, for example, and I clear my screen, and then I zoom in and I do an if config like this. If I do an if config and scroll up, you are going to see that my IP address is 192.168.40.128. And remember, at the beginning of this tutorial, I told you that for you to be able to discover devices on this network, you must know the network part of we must know the network in which we are located in. So this part of the IP address is the network part. So I simply took this network part and brought it down here, and instead of putting 128, I replaced this 128 with a 0 and I gave it a /24. That is what I just did there. So now that we are here, you are going to hit enter, and you are now going to see that it brings us this interface here, and you can see how fast it brings all the devices that are found on this network. You can see that most of the devices are 192.168.40.40, and then they only change at the host part of the operating system here. This is how hackers, penetration testers discover devices on a network, and then they can now further their attack. They can now look at the services that are running on that system, look at the open ports, look at the versions of those services that are running on that system using Nmap or using other tools, and so on and so forth. I am going to do a Control C to abort, and then I am going to clear my screen. I'll do Netdiscover forward or Netdiscover -help again. And I want to show you something. Now, let's say, for example, that you have a bunch of IP addresses that you want to scan, for example, and they are in a file. You are going to use a -L flag. It means scan the list of ranges contained into a given file. Now, take note, we want to use now a -L. We just finished using a -I, a -R, and now I want to show you how you can use a -L. So, what do we do? I am going to clear my screen again. I'll do ls. Why am I doing this? To list all the files and the folders or the directory that I have in my Kali Linux. And there is this file here, a .txt file that I have here. And this file has a series of IP addresses. Let us prove that this file has a series of IP addresses by doing a cat IP list.txt. And I hit enter. Now, these are IP addresses that are found here. These IP addresses that are found here are the IP addresses of these devices on the network that I already saved here. So now, take it for example, now that you want to scan this file to see if these IP addresses are really in existence. what are you going to do? You do Netdiscover, or you do a sudo Netdiscover, you give it a dash ETH0, and instead of using sudo Netdiscover dash I for the interface, dash I for interface ETH0, and then you give it dash L, meaning that you want to specify a set or a particular txt file. You want to point it to a particular file. You want to scan the IP addresses that are found on a particular file. And in our case, this file is iplist.txt. So if I hit enter, you see that it brings us that same interface, and you can see that we have confirmed that these are the IP addresses that are found on this network. And now, as a penetration tester, you can now go further to look at the weaknesses that are found on these devices, or using these IP addresses, and you can now hack into those systems. Please, hacking is not permitted. You can only do it if you have exclusive right to do it. Take note. Have a wonderful day. My name is Anakin Gion. Bye bye.